Did you eventually learn of another sexual relationship the defendant was involved in while you were in a dating relationship with her?
Yes,
Who did that involve?
with Alexander Woodworth.
Do you remember approximately when you learned about that relationship?
I kind of knew something was up at points, but I didn't really finitely know until the night that I had the conversation with him and John Hanson at Racy's.
So did you confront both of them at the same time?
Yes, I had a conversation with them.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to use the word confront. I should let you speak. How did you confirm that there was a sexual relationship between the defendant and Alex Woodworth?
I just like the list I made, I kept compiling things and it just fit. So I kind of figured it out myself. Plus other parties had elaborated to it on me.
Did you ask the defendant about the relationship?
Not immediately.
Did you ask or tell Alex that you knew?
I went out for a smoke with Alex and we had a semi-stern conversation about how, I really loved and respected him and I couldn't understand why this was happening. And then I did not know about the other stuff yet, but I mean.
Did the defendant eventually tell you about the sexual relationship she had with Alex Woodworth?
Yes.
Did she tell you, initially, what did she tell you about the first time that she was engaged in a sexual encounter with Alex Woodworth?
The first time, like the date, or the first time the encounter?
The first encounter, what did she tell you initially that was?
I believe while I was in the Redwoods, there was a date when they went on a walk together and some things transpired.
When you say things transpired, I don't want you to speculate, but did the defendant tell you more about what that means?
Well, she had spent the night, I believe, at his apartment.
Did the defendant tell you if she went to Alex Woodworth after the incident with John?
Yes, she went to him for like counsel or for help because she trusted him.
Did the defendant tell you what happened then?
That there was another situation. She put it as if he had taken like advantage of her weakened state almost. Again, I don't want you to make an inference or assume, but did the defendant say whether or not there was a sexual encounter between her and Alex Woodworth that time? I believe there was something coerced or some relations that were had.
Is that how she described it?
I'm going to object and ask that you move to strike. I believe something was coerced. His belief is not relevant.
I can follow up with a clarifying question, Judge.
All right, well, the objection's noted. Again, counsel, when you make your objection, please use the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's shut off. I mean, I can hear you, but
No, I apologize,
I don't
Judge.
know
I
that-
forgot.
public can hear you.
Okay, sure.
All right, well, again, Mr. Mengal, again, just stick to, again, what's asked and what was said to you. I think in this line of questioning, you pretty much have to stick with what Ms. McCandless said to you rather than how you interpreted it, okay?
Roger.
Okay.
Yes.
Did the defendant tell you that Alex took advantage of her?
That's how she stated it.
Now, you eventually, at some point you found out that the defendant and Alex Woodworth were involved in a relationship longer than just the February time period, correct?
Yeah, I believe so.
Um,
I wrote the dates down once again. I wrote the dates down once again on my.
And was there do you know what The Little Prince is?
It's a book. I think it's a French book.
And does that Little Prince mean anything to you in terms of figuring out a time period that you believe the relationship between the defendant and Alex Woodworth existed?
I believe that was the first night she spent at his house. They watched the movie and Donnie Darko.
And do you remember, as you sit there today, what the date that was?
Negative. I just looked at it, but I can't recall.
And if I showed you that same timeline that you mentioned, would that help refresh your recollection?
Yes.
Is this the same timeline that you previously looked at to refresh your recollection?
Yes.
And by looking at that again, would that help refresh your recollection as to the Little Prince
Yeah.
incident? And I'm going to take that away from you. If that refreshes your recollection, what was the date of the Little Prince movie viewing with the defendant and Alex Woodworth?
November 7th.
And that's 2017, correct?
Yes.
And you just did the defendant tell you eventually what had happened that night between the defendant and Alex Woodworth?
That the intercourse had happened.
All right, if I may approach again.
You may,
I'm going to show you what's marked as Exhibit 685. Do you recognize what that is?
That's me.
And what is it a picture of a message?
Yeah, this is me in California.
And that message, does it reference the Little Prince?
Yes, it says, was a great night.
I just want to.
So yeah, it references.
It references the Little Prince. And is that a conversation between you and the defendant?
Yes.
Does it have a date on it?
November 7th at 1:23 p.m.
Okay. Your Honor, so is that an accurate copy of a conversation you and the defendant had on November 7th, 2017?
Yes.
I move that exhibit into evidence and ask for permission to publish.
any objection?
Nope.
All right, Exhibit 6, is it 685?
It is.
And by the way, you were correct with the last one. I had it wrong. Exhibit 685 is received, you may publish.
So Exhibit 685. And Mr. Mengal, if you could read, so the top bubble, is that a message from the defendant to you?
Yes.
And what does that say?
She's also suicidal, so I've been really working hard to stay with her, but hanging with Sailor and her BF was great. I got to watch The Little Prince with Alex, so that's refreshing. Work tomorrow.
Thank you. Do you recall where you were at the time that that conversation occurred?
I believe I was in San Francisco, but I might have been already in Arcata.
Somewhere out west?
In California at that time, yeah.
Did the defendant give you an explanation of how the relationship between her and Alex Woodworth progressed?
Like an explanation on how it happened?
Yeah, did she say that, did she say if she was, yes, how did it happen?
They were both going through some things in life, and she had been through something traumatic. He had been through traumatic things, so they kind of bonded over, like, misery loves company kind of thing.
Did the defendant ever, and right now I'll follow up with some questions, but I just want a yes or no. First of all, did the defendant ever tell you about the sexual encounters between the two?
Negative. At that time?
At any point?
Not until I confronted.
So that was after you learned?
After I learned, yeah.
And what did the defendant tell you about the sexual encounters she had with Alex Woodworth?
Are we talking after I
Yes.
found out or before?
After you found out, I'm sorry.
Okay. She said that, we didn't talk much until after all this stuff had transpired, so it was different, I guess. I'm not sure what a tender term to use.
Did the information that she provided to you, was that after she moved out of your apartment?
The information provided, yes, after she was gone.
And did the defendant tell you that things went too fast with Alex?
Yeah, they went pretty fast, she said.
Did she tell you that Alex would do certain things to her during sexual acts?
She mentioned things, yes.
What did the defendant say?
I'm not entirely sure on the verbiage, but it was like choking or boarding or something, I believe it was. I can't really recall. Boarding? I'm not sure if I recall what it was called, but.
Now, that information that she told you, that was after she had moved out of your apartment?
This was way out. This is very far after, yes.
And was it also after you found out about her relationship with John Hanson?
Yes.
And it was obviously after you had found out about her relationship with Alex Woodworth, correct?
Yes.
Now, up until that point that you found out about those relationships, had she ever mentioned anything to you about that?
Up until she mentioned,
Had she, that was a terrible question, I'll rephrase that.
right.
Up until you found out about the defendant's relationship with both Alex as well as John Hanson, had she told you about the different sexual things Alex Woodworth did with her?
She didn't really elaborate. I knew that something had happened, but she didn't elaborate.
At some point, did you clean up a bandage or clean up Alex Woodworth's arm and put a bandage on?
I did.
How did that, was that because the defendant contacted you and said he needed to help Alex?
Yeah.
And where did you go to help Alex?
His and Matt's house.
What did you observe on Alex that needed to be bandaged?
He hadn't dug very deep, but he had slit his wrist.
Did you clean out the wound?
Yeah, I cleaned it out, and I think I used some type of Dermabond to seal it.
Do you remember approximately, and I know this is a long time ago, do you remember a month, a general time frame when that happened?
I can't be sure.
Do you remember telling officers that you thought it was around the time of like seasonal depression?
It was in the holiday season because I can't recall the exact date, but the knife that he said he had slipped using, he was drinking that night, he said he slipped and cut himself, was a gift from a coworker at work.
Did you see the knife that he said he used?
I didn't see the knife that he said he used.
Did the defendant tell you what Alex told her about why he cut his wrist?
He had told her if she didn't leave him, he was going to kill himself.
And when you say him, is that you?
Me, yes.
Did the defendant, when she described her sexual relationship with Alex Woodworth, did she describe it as consensual?
She said it was somewhat, I don't know how to speculate on consent.
And I won't ask you to speculate. Let me ask a different question. Did she ever tell you that did the defendant ever tell you that Alex took advantage of her?
There were times she said that he was aggressive and would kind of throw a tantrum almost.
Did she ever tell you that he raped her?
She never made it sound like rape with Alex.
But she did with John?
Yes.
And now I'm going to object to leading. Ask that be stricken.
Sustained and leading.
Did the defendant ever tell you how Alex described his feelings for the defendant?
He loved her very much.
That's what she said?
And I think at one point they planned to maybe move out to Portland or something.
Do you remember what time period generally that was?
I mean, it would have been initially after I had found out about all the stuff, because I confronted him and we had a slight conversation. I mean, I didn't like him, but I still loved him. I was angry.
And you're talking about Alex?
Woodworth, yes.
So you mentioned that you talked to both John as well as Alex once you found out about the relationships, right?
Yes, I talked to John.
Where did that conversation happen?
Me and John's?
When you were in person, not on the phone. We talked about the phone.
Oh,
but
yeah, at Racy's.
At Racy's? Was Alex there as well?
Yes. The conversation between John Hanson and me and Alex was before the John days, though. I didn't know about John's situation. And I believe I did not know about John's situation until after the fact.
Okay.
Because I talked to John Hanson outside about, did you know this? Like, how come nobody told me? Like, why is everyone just lying to me?
About Alex?
Yes, I don't think I had any information on Hanson's transgression yet.
And then, do you remember, was there an event that was going on the day that the not confrontation, but the discussion with Alex occurred at Racy's?
Yeah, there was an art exhibit, like at Shift, the bike coffee shop.
Now, at some point, you talked with law enforcement about the John Hanson relationship with the defendant, correct?
Yes.
And do you remember going over to Josh Trankler's house?
Yeah, I was pretty irate.
Was that before or after you found out about John?
Before, after I found out about John.
Yeah, did you go to Josh's house? Was that
I
after?
already knew about it when I went to Josh's.
And when you said you were pretty irate, was that because you learned about John?
I learned about what had happened, and I just wanted Josh to help me find like a center and like, what do we do? Like, what do we do for her?
Was Josh a good friend of yours?
He's very good.
Did he call the police?
Yeah, he called the police, and someone came over to take statements.
And did the defendant go to the police department, if you know?
At some later date, yes, I was with her.
Do you remember if she went that night? If you recall.
She might have went in for a kit, but it was a couple days it had been so many days that I think they said it wouldn't have been plausible to find.
So that's just based on your recollection?
That's at least my recollection.
Okay. Did you ever tell the defendant that she had to go tell the police?
I didn't want to force her, but the way I prefaced it was, you can't, if this assault happened, just because there's a chance that they won't find evidence on you, it'll put someone on the radar for future. And it's not about an assault that happened to you, it's for the next girl. So I kind of tried to, I wouldn't say I tried to coach her, but I just tried to like show her the humanity in it and be like, if this happened, you need to report this.
Did you tell her what to say?
No, I didn't coach her at all.
Did you ever tell her to lie?
No.
So after you found out about Alex and the defendant and John and the defendant, I assume you said Racy's is a pretty tight-knit group?
Yeah.
Did people at Racy's find out?
Yeah, everyone knew.
Did they talk about it?
It was kind of hush. Like, I mean, it was like Snickers and stuff like that, People would, sidebar comments and whatnot.
Did the defendant ever talk to you about whether or not she cared that people knew?
About the relationships?
Or about, let me rephrase that. Did she ever talk to you about people talking about her at Racy's?
She didn't like it.
So she knew it was happening?
Yeah, she knew it was happening.
At some point, were you alerted that there was a message in the bathroom at Racy's?
Yes.
What was that message?
It was like black ink and then her number.
Did you see it yourself?
I saw it myself at one point and took a photo. I wrote over it.
What did you write over it?
A conversation that, we had a conversation, and her father, Joe, had told her like life starts now. And like she was in the process of getting another job. She was going in on, I think it was a Friday, for a TB test to be read. She was going to pick up scrubs.
So things were
Things
changing.
were going good. Like it was just like you don't have to live in the past just because these bad things happen.
And
Life starts now.
you took a picture of the message?
Yeah,
Did you send it to the defendant?
I sent it to her.
Okay. Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
Mr. Mengal, is that the photograph of the message on the board?
Yeah,
Is that an accurate picture,
I mean it's a picture of it.
as you recall it?
As I recall it, yes.
I'd move Exhibit 479 into evidence.
Any objection?
No.
All right, Exhibit 479 will be received.
And without putting it on the screen, it said the words, "fuck me," and then the number you knew to be associated with the defendant, correct?
With her calling app.
Okay, so that was a number
Text
that
now.
maybe wasn't her phone, but it was an app that she had?
She had an app on her iPhone, yes, her iPod.
I'm sorry, that exhibit number is 479,
Yes.
so it's not part of 465?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Your Honor, if I may approach again?
You may. And just, how long are you going to go yet with direct?
That's going to be a while still.
Okay, I think this is a good time to take a restroom break. So we'll recess for, how much time is, we'll give you 10 minutes, all right? And, well, I was just asked the bailiff, how much time do you think the jury would need?
10 minutes.
10 enough time? Okay, so 10 minutes, we'll be in recess until 3:42 on that clock.
I'm going to show you what's marked as Exhibit 677. And without talking about the contents, I'll just have you look and see if you recognize what is on the front.
Yes,
And then if you could look and see if you recognize what is on the back.
yes.
And I'm going to ask you some follow-up questions about Exhibit 677. Without talking about the content, I'll just ask you straight out, is that a letter that you received?
Yes, that is the letter I received.
And who gave you that letter?
So that was written by Jenna?
Jenna Van de Zand?
Yes.
So Alex's roommate, and when she gave the letter to you, were
Alex's
you-
girlfriend.
I'm sorry, your roommate, Alex's girlfriend,
And that would be
Alex
Alex Zink?
correct?
Okay.
And when you received this letter, did you jot some things down on the back?
That was like my rough outline of the timeline.
So you've already refreshed your recollection with a timeline of events as it relates to different time periods related to this case, correct?
This was before the previous one I viewed, but yeah, this was like my rough understanding because I was asking questions about it.
Now, if you recall, what were you doing when this letter was given to you?
I was asleep.
And what caused you to be asleep?
I was drunk.
You were drunk?
Yes.
And do you remember what general time frame this was?
Probably pretty late at night. We had come home from the bar, me and Jenna.
Okay. And what date or part of month, if you recall?
I can't really speculate. I can't remember exactly when. It was very close to
Alex's death?
Alex's death, yes.
So if Alex died on the 22nd of March 2018, would it have been a couple days before that?
Whenever the phone call between me and,
Okay, so there was a phone call that led to this letter?
yeah, I hung up. I didn't want to talk anymore. And
Who was the phone call between you and who?
It was between me and Ezra, and then after I hung up, she called Jenna and talked with Jenna.
Okay. And so late at night, you were drunk. I'm sorry, did you say the defendant called you or you called her?
I can't recall who called whom, but yeah,
You ended up hanging up?
I ended up hanging up because I was just sick of it.
When you say sick of it, what do you, just briefly, what are you referring to as it?
Well, I found out more information at the bar. Me and Jenna had,
Without
Alexander's-
knowing, I'm sorry, without going into the content of what you were told at the bar, you found out some new information. Was that about Alex Woodworth and the defendant?
I found out more, yes.
Was it information that was about their relationship?
I believe so.
And was it recent in time to the time you received the letter?
The time I received the letter was in the morning. I think Jenna had written it because Ezra had asked her to wake me, but she said I wasn't going to wake him.
Okay.
It's sustained with personal knowledge, I assume is.
So, did you end up talking to the defendant about this letter?
To Ms. McCandless? Yes.
And do you remember, did you give this letter to her or just talk to her about it?
I think I gave it to her. That was the copy that was intended for me, I believe.
The copy of the letter was intended for you?
Yeah, Ms. Van Zandt, I believe, wrote 2 copies of that letter.
Okay. And did you,
I object unless he has personal knowledge of that.
Okay, sustained on personal knowledge.
did you talk to the defendant about the letter?
Yes, I did.
Now, I want to skip ahead to March 22nd, 2018, the date of Alex Woodworth's death. Do you remember where you were that morning?
Oh, I woke up and went to do laundry. So I was between the laundromat that burned down over on Water Street.
In Oak
It
Lake?
wasn't burned down at the time, but the laundromat in Racy's, I was going back and forth.
Did you talk to the defendant that morning by phone or text?
Yeah, we had talked.
And did the defendant tell you whether or not she was coming to Eau Claire that day?
No, she hadn't mentioned anything.
Did she tell you that she was in Stanley?
I believe she was at Joe's, yes.
Okay. And Joe's would be Joe Carlin, who lives in Stanley?
Yes.
When you would talk to the defendant and she would be coming into town, would she typically tell you what her plan was?
I mean, usually she'd let me know, so we'd meet up and talk and make sure, just like a wellness check, make sure she's doing good.
So you were going back and forth between the dry cleaner and Racy's. Did the defendant eventually show up at Racy's?
Yeah, I thought I was off because she wasn't supposed to be driving.
And let me just, what time approximately was that, if you recall?
I honestly don't recall.
Morning time?
It was morning.
Do you remember where you were when you first saw the defendant?
I was sitting on the bench, I believe with Maxwell and a few of the other regulars.
The bench outside?
The bench outside Racy's, yes.
Did you have, without getting into the content, any conversation with the defendant?
Very brief. We might have passed a couple idle words, but not much. I was more confused than I was, like,
Did the defendant and you eventually go into Racy's? Maybe not together, but,
not together. I mean,
and did the defendant eventually leave with Max to go somewhere?
I saw them leave together. I was preoccupied with my laundry. I was like, well, I got to bike back to the laundromat, pick up my laundry, switch it over. And she said she was going to go trade some paintings. And I was like, oh, okay.
Did you notice anything about the defendant's demeanor that caused you concern?
She was a little fired up.
Now, by this point, you had known the defendant for many months, correct?
Yeah.
Were you able to pick up on nonverbal cues
Yeah.
with her?
I'm very empathetic, so I feel things.
Did you notice anything specific about her eyes?
There was intentions in them. Like, I think she was angry about the way people were treating her at the coffee shop.
Now, Judge, I'm going to object to his opinion about how Ms. McCandless felt. He can relate what she said, but otherwise, this is purely speculation.
Well, I'm going to overrule on this. I think we've covered this. He can describe his observations. So let's stick to what Mr. Mengal observed.
Mr. Mengal, you said you used the term fired up. Did that impression of the defendant come from what you observed in her expression in her eyes?
Yeah, I mean, like throughout our relationship, like there were times when she just would.
And that
Yeah.
it seemed like she was fired up?
Yeah, like not, it didn't always mean negatively though. She just like had, you know.
Okay. Did you have a conversation recent to that date, March 22nd, 2018, about journals that the defendant was writing?
Yeah, she was talking this, she was seeking help and for her mental health and
Did she tell you that she was journaling?
yes.
Did she tell you what she was going to do with those journals?
She had mentioned wanting to get her voice back and giving them possibly to the two, John Hanson and Alexander Woodworth.
Do you remember having a conversation on Instagram with the defendant about journals
Yes.
and about her going and talking to Alex?
I believe, yeah, Alex.
Your Honor, if I may approach?
You may.
I'm showing you what's marked as Exhibit 465. Have you seen that document before?
Yeah, I'm privy to this.
And is that a conversation you had with the defendant?
Yes.
And is that Instagram?
This is Instagram, yes.
And having reviewed that already, is that an accurate copy of the conversation as you recall it?
It's hard to read because it's, the format of it is different, but it's the conversation we had.
Okay, so the content is,
The content is there, yeah.
I would move Exhibit 465 into evidence and ask to be published to the jury.
Any objection?
I previously noted a minor, but no.
All right, preserve for the record, and Exhibit 465 will be received and you may publish.
Counselor, are you starting with page 983 then? Where it says 983 on the top?
So I'm showing you Exhibit 465, and you mentioned that the format is off because the messages go backwards in time, is that right?
Backwards and upwards, yes.
So the beginning of this conversation would actually start at the bottom of the last page, is that your understanding?
Yeah, however it was printed, it would start at whatever page and work forward.
Okay.
This is gonna be hard with my dyslexia, but
Okay.
I'll wing it.
We'll work through it. I've got pages, let me just show you, it's pages 975 to 983, would you agree?
What's that?
Pages on the top right corner, pages 975,
Yeah.
76,
7.
77, all the way up to 983.
Roger.
You would agree?
Yeah.
So I'm going to start by showing you the message on page number 983 of Exhibit 465. And I'll zoom in a bit here.
Okay.
Are you familiar with what UTC means?
With what, UTC?
In terms of time?
Yeah, I believe someone said it was a global time.
Okay, so-
sometime.
Is it your understanding that that's not Central Time?
No, I think that's different than like what we would consider standard central time.
And the date on these messages is March 12th, 2018. Do you see that?
Yes, I see that.
Okay. Now, I'm going to start with the first message on the bottom, which is March 12th, 2018 at 12:41:04 UTC time. Do you see that?
Yes.
And now I'm going to go down to the text, which says, or first of all, the conversations, you're familiar with your Instagram tagline as well as the defendant's, correct?
Correct.
And this one that you're viewing is, the author is the defendant, correct?
Yes.
And it says, "That sounds lovely," is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And then I'm going to go up to the next message. The author is again the defendant, correct?
Yes.
And the recipients are both, it lists the defendant as well as you, correct?
Correct.
So the text is a message from the defendant to you that says, what?
Not I much to distract.
And then moving to the next message, again, it's authored by, this one's by you to the defendant, correct?
That's for me, yes.
And it says, yeah, Britt ended up at the trap, correct?
Yes.
The next message, actually, I'm going to skip ahead to a few above. The author, I'm sorry, you're looking at orange. No, thank you. The author is the defendant, and you are one of the recipients, correct?
Yes.
And the message says, from the defendant to you, says, "Tuesday I plan on coming to town and doing an errand before I meet up with you," correct?
Correct.
Now I'm going to move to page 982. But first of all, on the top of page 983, the recipients listed are the defendant and you, correct?
Yes.
And then the bottom of page 982 is authored by the defendant, and it says, "I mean, you could honestly be in the car while I do it," correct? Off the screen again.
That was way off the screen, yeah.
There we go.
That was by who's the, that was by her, yes.
So the author is the defendant, you're the recipient, it says, "I mean, you could honestly be in the car while I do it," correct?
Correct.
And she said again, the next message, "wouldn't mind," correct?
I believe that's, well, is that the sender or the receiver?
So the author is the defendant,
Yes, that's
correct?
her.
And she says, "wouldn't mind," correct?
Correct.
The next one is authored by you to the defendant, correct?
Yes,
And it says, "what errand," is that right?
that's correct.
The next one is again by you to the defendant, is that right?
Yes, that's from me.
And the text is, "the stuff from Racy's or Robin thing, question mark," correct?
Correct.
The next message is the defendant to you, and the text says, "Alex got me a Little Prince book. I want to give it back and tell him off a little, then walk away before he has a chance to talk, then grab the Racy stuff," correct?
Correct.
The next message is authored by the defendant. You are one of the recipients, correct?
Correct.
And it says, "and be done with all that, be done with that negativity," correct?
Correct.
The next message is authored by you,
Yep.
sent to the defendant, and the text is, "thought you burned all that stuff," correct?
Correct.
So then the message on top here, the recipients are you as well as the defendant, correct?
Correct.
And then moving to the bottom of page 981, the author is the defendant, correct?
Correct.
And the text is, "found the Little Prince last night," correct?
Correct.
The next message is authored by the defendant, sent to you, with the text being, "I burned hope against hope," correct?
Correct.
And is that a book?
I believe that was a book, yes.
The next message, authored by the defendant, sent to you, says, "kinda want my last word," correct?
Correct.
The next message, authored by you to the defendant, says, "why did he give you a kid's book," correct?
Correct.
The next message, authored by the defendant to you, said, "he barely had the respect to talk to you. I want to give him one last word. He gave me it because I love foxes and the movie, correct?
Correct.
The next message authored by the defendant sent to you is, it's one of my favorites because of animation styles, correct?
Correct.
The next message authored by the defendant to you is, but I don't want that thing in my house, correct?
Correct.
In the top of this page, the recipients for the next message are, that's going to be,
Us both again.
both of you are listed, correct?
Correct.
And then if we look at the bottom of page 980, the author is listed as you, correct?
Correct.
And the text says, when did he do that, correct?
Yes.
The next message is authored by you, sent to the defendant with the text, I remember that in our room, correct?
Correct.
Are you referring to the book?
The Little Prince book, yes.
So that was in your apartment?
Yeah, it was at our apartment at some point.
And the next message, authored by you, sent to the defendant, said blue cover, correct?
Correct.
The next message, authored by the defendant, sent to you, said he gave it to me a bit after Christmas, said it was his way of being happy to have a new friend, correct?
Correct.
The next message, sent by the defendant to you, said yup, correct?
Yes.
The next message, sent by you to the defendant, says stars, correct?
Correct. They're out of order in a way where she's referring to, I said blue, she said yep, stars, yep. You know,
So
like
the conversation is overlapping a bit?
conversation is kind of overlapping, but it's talking about the book.
The next message, at least on this sheet, author, the defendant, to you, says, I want to get rid that thing, it just pisses me off, correct?
Correct.
The next message has both of you listed as recipients, and we'll move to the bottom of page 979. The author is listed as the defendant, correct?
Yes.
And it says, I bet it was his actual way of being like, oh, I'm Ezra's friend. I know they like this, and it will make them think I'm actually not trash, correct?
Correct.
The next message, authored by the defendant to you, said, everything is all garbage to me now, correct?
Correct.
The next message, authored by the defendant to you, says, just trash, correct?
Correct.
The next message, authored by the defendant to you, says, useless paper and trash, correct?
Correct.
The next message, authored by you to the defendant,
Yes.
says, well, I don't have to be there for all this, correct?
Correct.
The next message, authored by the defendant to you, says, kind of want you to be, but that's selfish, AHA, correct?
Correct.
The next message, authored by you to the defendant, says, I don't want anything to do with him, correct?
Correct.
And the last message on the top of this page is it's recipients, both you and the defendant, correct?
Correct.
And going to the bottom of the next page, 978. The author is the defendant, correct? Off the
Yes.
screen again.
Yeah, it's off the screen.
That's the author is the defendant, correct?
Correct.
And it says, I can do it alone, correct?
Correct.
The next message is the defendant, I'm sorry, you
Yeah.
to the defendant, and it says, I cleaned him up, correct?
Correct.
The next message is the defendant to you stating, I'm afraid I might punch him though if he gives me a look, correct?
Correct.
The next message says, it's authored by you to the defendant when he pretended to off himself, correct?
Correct.
Was that in reference to when you bandaged his arm?
Yeah.
And we're talking, all these messages are talking to Alex, as you understand, talking about Alex Woodworth, correct?
Yes.
The next message from you to the defendant says, my kindness is not weakness, correct?
Correct.
The next message from you to the defendant says, when someone hurts me badly, I'm done, correct?
Correct.
The next message from the defendant to you says, to be honest, I might punch him in the face if he DOSE his sarcastic, your dumb voice, correct?
Correct.
The next message says, authored by the defendant, sent to you. We'll move to the bottom of page 977. It says, I just want to give it back, say stay out of my life, and tell him how much I regret meeting him, correct?
Correct.
And that was the defendant to you?
Yes.
The next message, authored by the defendant, sent to you, says, then walk away and never see his face again, correct?
Correct.
The next message by the defendant to you says, I'll stay composed, correct?
Correct.
The next message, authored by you to the defendant, says he's going to want to talk, correct?
Correct.
The next message sent by you to the defendant says, or laugh at you, or IDK, correct?
Correct.
The next message sent by the defendant to you says, you know my sass when I'm real mad, correct?
Correct.
The next message from the defendant to you says, how my voice gets and how fast I talk, correct?
Correct.
The next message on the top, we don't have the text yet, but the author is the defendant. You are the recipient, correct?
Correct.
We'll move to the bottom of page 976. It says, I doubt he will get in a word, correct?
Correct. From her to him.
From her to you.
Or from her to me, yes.
The next message from the defendant to you says, he's scared of me, correct?
Correct.
The next message from the defendant to you says, he expects me to be weak right now, correct?
Correct.
The next message from you to the defendant says, you talk like capital R-I-C-A-N, or however that's spelled, correct?
Correct.
What did you mean in that? What were you referring to with the R-I-C-A-N? Is that Rican?
Yeah, it was. She would speak super fast and she got sassy.
And what does Rican mean?
I don't know. I think it's a derogatory term, but I didn't realize it at the time.
Okay. And above that we have, is that something that you had discussed with her in the past, used that term?
Yeah, it was like a joke.
Okay. Between the two of you?
Sort of.
And above that, we have capital A-H-A-H-H-A-H-A.
Yeah.
That was from the defendant to you, correct?
Correct.
The next message from the defendant to you says, yes, hun, H-U-N, correct?
Correct.
The next message from you to the defendant says, don't use racial words in text ever, correct?
Correct.
And is that you basically saying to yourself, I shouldn't have put Rican in this message?
That was her informing me that it was racist.
But it's from you to her, correct?
Oh, I guess it is.
So, if you recall, were you referring to your use of the word Rican?
I might have been.
Okay.
I'm confused about that.
Okay, but there's no other explanation contained?
There's no other explanation based on the data up there.
Okay.
Yeah.
The next message from you to the defendant says, so yeah, LOL, correct?
Correct.
We'll move to the bottom of page 975, which you'll be happy to hear is the last page. Off the screen, we've got author, you, to the defendant, and it was some sort of link, it appears, correct?
Yeah, I think it was an image or something.
Okay. And then we have author, the defendant, to you, and it says, I just don't think he deserves the satisfaction of thinking I'm weak right now and that I'm alone and lesser. I'm not a toy. I will not just let his shit stay at my house, and I will not let anything poison my mind anymore. Correct?
Correct.
The next message seems to move on. It's a message from her to you, and it says, I love that song. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. All of these messages, are they referring to Alex Woodworth, if you know?
Yes.
Done with that for right now, thank you. Did you have a conversation with the defendant about what you thought, how you thought she should deliver journals that she was writing to Alex and or John?
Well, email or send it through the mail. It's like the modern era.
Is that what you suggested to her?
I mean, she had said that she wanted to deliver them herself, but I said, you don't, unless you have like a keep the peace or somebody there, you should just send them. Like, it's the modern era.
And without going into why, were you concerned about her delivering those in person?
I was concerned for all parties involved.
Did the defendant send you a copy of her journals?
Yes, she sent me.
Was that by electronic sending?
I believe she sent it to my Gmail.
Okay. Do you remember when that was in relation to Alex's death?
They were the first or the second. There were two, I believe. Two journals.
Let's start with the first. When did she send that, if you recall?
I wouldn't know an exact date, but it was a couple days before. I'm assuming like a week maybe.
Within a week of Alex's death?
I'd have to refresh my memory on.
Is that your best
specifics.
recollection?
That's my best recollection.
What about the second journal? Do you remember when she sent that to you?
I believe it was like the night or so before me and Julia had both received it the same night.
Judge, I object to him saying unless Ms. McCandless told him she already sent to Julia Post, unless it's fine, but otherwise, I don't know his personal knowledge.
Sustained. Again, your microphone is not on, so I don't know if everybody heard that objection, but again, this is a personal knowledge objection. And so just again, what you know personally.
Did the defendant tell you if she sent the journals electronically to anyone else?
Yes,
Who did she say she sent the journals to?
to Julia.
Is that her friend Julia Post?
Yes.
Once, did you eventually, on March 22nd, 2018, go looking for the defendant?
The day of
The day that you saw her at Racy's?
yes.
Why did you go looking for the defendant?
Something did not seem right.
Where did you go initially, if you recall?
Initially, I started just biking around trying to think like, well, maybe she went to John's house, but I realized it was pretty far out and the roads were pretty nasty, so I thought I'll go to Alex's first and then go out of town afterwards.
And when you went to Alex's, what did you see from the outside?
I saw her car idling in his driveway.
Was there anybody in the car?
Negative.
But obviously the keys were inside if it was idling.
Yeah, it was idling.
What did you do?
Well, I sat across at the, there's like a school across the way. I sat there, parked my bike, because I just was like, well, everything's probably fine. Everything's probably fine. You know, I wasn't sure for both parties involved that they should be alone.
Did you eventually go in the car and take the keys out?
I went in the car and turned the car off, yes. At that time, I noticed that note that was on the passenger seat.
I'm sorry, he dropped his voice and I couldn't hear him.
At that time, I noticed the note that he had showed me earlier on the passenger seat.
Was that the note from Jenna?
Yes.
Do you know how that note got there?
I had given it to Ezra, I believe.
Was there anybody else in or around the car aside from you in that area?
No, I looked around, I didn't see anybody. That was about it, you know. I just felt something was not right because
And did you knock on the door to the house?
not initially. I waited for quite a while. I was like, maybe everything's fine, they'll just come out. But after about 40 minutes or so, I just had an uneasy feeling. So I approached the door and my cell phone went off and I had a very noticeable ringtone. I heard her call down, "Just let him help you." Her recognizing my phone. So I was like, oh God, he's hurting himself again. So I just ran up the stairs.
And when you heard someone say, "Just let him help you," were you referring to the defendant?
Yeah,
That's the person who said that?
Ezra, it was Ezra's voice, yes.
So you went into the house?
Yes, I was in the house.
You went upstairs?
Yes.
Did you go into a room?
Yeah, on the right-hand side, it was his bedroom.
That was Alex's room?
I believe so.
Do you remember if the door was open or closed when you went upstairs?
Slightly ajar.
Who was inside?
Ezra and Alexander.
And for these purposes, when we say Alex or Alexander, we're talking about Woodworth, right?
Woodworth, Roger. Yes.
Where was Alex located in the room, if you recall?
I believe he was closer to the window and she was closer to the door,
Were they standing or sitting, if you remember?
sitting on the bed.
Did you ask if everyone was all right?
Yeah, I was very, like, you guys scared the shit out of me. You know, I was like, I was worried, you know.
Did the defendant say she was all right?
They both, you know, there had been, when I was outside and I had heard the "just let him help you," there was bickering going on. So I was under the impression that she wasn't being allowed to leave. So I was scared for him. I was scared for her. But they seemed like oddly calm.
When you got up there, did the defendant say, "He won't let me leave"?
No, she didn't say anything like that.
Did she say she wanted to leave?
No,
Did she say, "Help me, Jason"?
negative.
Did she say, "He's trying to hurt me"?
No.
Did you suggest that they go somewhere else to talk?
Yeah, I told them I would wait outside and then that they should probably go to a venue of some sort to have such delicate conversations.
Did the police arrive?
Yes, the police arrived.
Did you speak with them?
I spoke with a couple cops at the time.
Did, when the police arrived, were you exiting the house?
I think I was just walking out because I told them if anything awry was going to happen, they could make a noise. Like, you know, he had plenty of books, throw a book against the wall, you know, whatever, and I'll come back in.
You said that to the defendant and Alex?
To both of them, both parties. But they wanted to continue the conversation.
Did the defendant and Alex eventually come outside as well?
After I spoke with law enforcement, about the time law enforcement went to enter the house, they were both exiting.
Where did the defendant go when she exited the house?
When she exited the house, I think she came over to the driver's side of her car, I believe,
And where did Alex eventually go when he came out of the house?
the passenger side.
Did law enforcement talk with them as well?
They talked with them.
Did law enforcement eventually leave?
Yes.
And did the defendant and Alex eventually leave?
Yeah, we had a conversation and they both left.
What was your impression from that conversation as to where they were going?
Well, we had all talked a little bit and said, you know, it probably makes sense to go someplace public. I mean, so they'd agreed to go to a coffee shop. It sounded like they didn't want to air their dirty laundry at like Racy's, so they were going to go someplace else. So I understood that. I was like, yeah, that's probably a tender place to go.
Did you see them leave?
I saw them drive away.
In Ezra's, in the defendant's car?
What?
Were they leaving in the defendant's car?
Yes,
And who was driving, if you remember?
Ezra was driving at that time.
Alex was in the front passenger seat?
Yes.
Did you eventually return to Racy's?
Yeah, I went back to Racy's.
Did you eventually send some messages via Instagram to the defendant?
Yeah, I still had an uneasy feeling, so I was bumming around quite a bit.
Did the defendant respond to any of those messages?
Without Wi-Fi, she wasn't able to respond, I'm assuming, because her phone needed Wi-Fi to send messages back.
So you didn't receive any messages in response?
It didn't show like seen or anything.
Did you eventually get on your bike and go looking for Alex and the defendant?
Yeah, I started to freak out when me and Joe had talked about her She was supposed to get the.
And-
No, I object. I
That's
abstain.
okay. I'll just ask you questions about what you saw and what you know not from other people. So did you then go to eventually end up at the Eau Claire Police Department
Yes,
and talk to some officers?
yes.
Did you eventually find out that the defendant had been located?
Eventually, I talked to an officer from Dunn County.
Had you been in the defendant's vehicle in the days prior to Alex's death?
Yes,
Do you remember ever seeing a knife?
I don't recall there being a knife in the center console. I had given her it was a National Guard one with a broken clasp at one point. I had given her, she had, I think my Alexander Zink had given her one at one point too, but
The knife that you gave her, was it labeled somehow?
labeled.
Yeah, did it have any markings on it that were distinguishable? You said Wisconsin National Guard, was it?
Yeah, I think on the blade it would have said Wisconsin Army National Guard or something to that.
Do you remember in the days leading up to, you said you were in the defendant's vehicle. Do you remember looking for a knife in the vehicle?
Yeah, at one point she used to always have one in the center console, and I forget what I needed to cut, what I was going to cut, I think I had a shoelace that broke or something. I was going to cut it off and retie it, and I couldn't find a knife.
I think you said that was within a few days prior to March 22nd, 2018?
Yes.
You looked, but you couldn't find a knife?
Yeah, the one that I had given her had usually resided inside that.
Your Honor, may I approach? You may. I'm going to show you what's marked as Exhibit 233. Is that the knife that you gave her?
Negative.
Is that a knife that you have ever seen in the defendant's vehicle?
No, I've never seen that one.
And just so the jury can understand that, there's some markings that says EMT on that knife, correct?
Yes.
I'm going to show you, Madam Clerk, if I could have the screen with the computer. I'm showing you what's marked as Exhibit 135. It's already been received into evidence. Is that the knife, or at least consistent with the knife that you gave the defendant?
Yeah, I mean, it has the broken clasp where it would hook to your belt, so I'm assuming it's probably the same knife.
Go ahead, I'm gonna have you repeat that.
Oh, sorry. It has the same where the 3 Allen parts are. That's where the clasp they used to be, where it would hook onto my belt. I'm assuming that's where the other one was broken, so.
And there's a marking, it looks like it says Wisconsin. Is that consistent with the knife you gave her that says Wisconsin National Guard?
Yeah.
Now, between the time that the defendant moved out of your apartment in February of 2018 and up to March 22nd, 2018, the date of Alex Woodworth's death, did you continue to have regular contact with the defendant?
Yes. Yeah.
How frequently would you communicate with the defendant?
Pretty often, I would say daily. We were still friends. I still worried about her.
Did you continue, before you talked about I love yous and you are valued and things like that, did you continue to say those things to each other?
Of course, yeah. She was still very important. People were important to me.
Even while broken up, did you continue to engage in a sexual relationship during that same time period with the defendant?
There were moments of weakness, yes.
Were there messages, if you recall, where the defendant expressed her feelings for you?
Yes.
Did she tell you that she loved you?
Yes.
Did she tell you that she missed you?
Yes.
Did she tell you how much it hurt to be without you?
Yes.
Did she tell you how much she wanted to be with you?
Yes.
did she ever talk about a future together with you?
Yeah.
Nothing further, thank you.
All right, who's going to do cross-examination? Ms. Vishney, I know you're probably all set to go. How long do you believe cross-examination would take?
I think we should start cross-examination tomorrow morning.
Okay, well, I'm thinking the same thing. I know I have some jurors that have to be somewhere, and if we started now, we wouldn't finish this witness in time.
There's no way.
So, all right, well, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to recess tomorrow, and Mr. Mengal, you'll have to come back tomorrow morning. We are going to begin testimony at 8:30 a.m., so just, again, you've all been great in being on time, and I just want to remind you of the instruction that I read yesterday. I think I'll read it every other day, but I just want to remind you to not listen to anything about this case, no individuals, no media, no radio, TV, internet, social media. Do not allow yourselves to be exposed to any information about this case, and don't discuss the case with anyone, even amongst other jurors, until this case is finally given to you and you've heard all of the evidence and been instructed by the court. Do not do any research independently into the public records involving any of the parties. Do not visit any scenes. And that's a brief summary. And everybody has been instructed on that. I'll give you the formal instruction again tomorrow, but I'm not going to make you go through that at this point. So, okay, all rise. All right. Mr. Mengal, you understand that, again, you are under subpoena, as I understand it, and you've been asked questions. Have you been advised of the exclusion order, not to discuss your testimony with any other persons?
Yes, I understand.
Okay, so I don't want you talking to anybody about this case or discussing it with anyone, frankly. And includes, not to watch any coverage about the case so that you might see any witnesses or what their testimony might be. Understood?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else council would like to be addressed with Mr. Mengal before we adjourn for the day?
Judge, you said 8:30 will start up, so I just asked that he be here at 8:15 at the latest tomorrow.
Roger.
Yep. All right, that's what time we hope to then bring the jury in and begin testimonies at 8:30 tomorrow morning. Okay, then you may step down and be excused for the day, sir. And you're good to go. Thank you. All right, is there anything that either council?
One thing I think we should probably mention, Your Honor, and yesterday afternoon, after we were done with court, I believe it was Detective Prock received a message or a call from Detective Beardsley, who was one of our witnesses earlier, who had been excused and was advised that he was excused, he wouldn't be recalled. He received a subpoena yesterday from the defense, which is certainly perfectly fine, but we just need to advise the court and counsel that after he was excused, he did watch some of the court TV coverage. I believe he thought he watched the part with Detective Conkey's testimony. So just so that the court and counsel are aware of that.
All right, anything that defense counsel would like to put on the record at this point?
About that or about anything?
About anything before we adjourn for the evening.
Just sorting out witnesses for tomorrow as well as future scheduling. The defense would just like to take that up.
All right. And Ms. Vishney, how long do you anticipate cross-examination may be?
It's really hard to say because if he says yes to everything that I say, it'll be 45 minutes. But it could go longer. There's some things he said that, there's some prior inconsistent statements and you never know how people react to that. And there's some other selections from Instagram I'm going to use. So I don't know if it's going to be 2 hours, 1 hour. It's really hard for me to say.
And that's fine. That's fine.
I mean, he's a much longer witness than what I anticipated. I really thought we'd be done with him all together today.
All right. And so does the state have a rough idea after Mr. Mengal?
We are anticipating Matthew Schreiner, who will be relatively brief. Court Fox, our direct of him is going to be relatively brief. I would say probably 15 minutes for each one of those for direct. Michelle Wright will be relatively brief. It's basically identifying a few things that she created, such as the association chart, the maps that we've already seen, at least briefly with a couple of witnesses, and then Detective Prock. Oh, and Jenna Van de Zand, and she will be about how long for direct? About 20 minutes for direct. And then it'll be Detective Prock. It'll take a little while, and we intend to play the 2 interviews that he conducted of the defendant, which total up to just shy of 2 hours total.
All right.
Can I ask some follow-up questions, Jeff?
Yes, go ahead.
Do you intend to play the interview or ask him questions about his interview of Ms. McCandless about the John Hanson matter?
I'm going to ask him a very few questions about that, not more than a half a dozen. And I'd be happy to advise counsel. I'll send, I can advise counsel in the morning the exact areas that we intend to cover. And it's very, very limited as to that. We do not intend to play that interview in whole or in part.
Do you object to our, I don't know that I'm going to, but just so if we know we have to sort it out, do you object to our asking to play the recording based upon the rule of completeness?
Yes, we will. As far as playing the whole thing, as I say, our interview is going to be extraordinarily brief as it relates to that. I'm going to ask about probably 2, 3, 4 things about that interview, and that's it. And so, yes, I will object to playing the whole interview under the rule of completeness because, as Eugenio makes clear, and we mentioned this morning, the rule of completeness is not an open door for everything just because you talk about it. It's only those things that are necessary to prevent distortion or unfairness, and the rule of completeness only allows in things that are related to or would distort the truth if you don't allow them to go into it. So if I talk about a couple areas, you can't talk about something that can't introduce something that's totally unrelated to the areas that I'm talking about.
No, we're aware of the law. I was just wanting to know so we can be prepared to make our arguments tomorrow when that comes back. Do you expect that you will be finished with Detective Prock tomorrow? Do you expect my cross to begin tomorrow?
I would certainly hope that we will be done with Detective Prock yet tomorrow, yes.
Okay. Do you intend to then have witnesses on Friday? I'm just trying to line up our witnesses.
I am, unless Detective Prock goes into Friday, which I'm hoping he does not know, Detective Prock will be the last witness. And I will, at this point in time, Your Honor, and on the record, advise the areas that I intend to cover with Detective Prock about the John Hanson interview. Number one, that the defendant deleted all of her messages between herself and John Hanson. Number two, that she stated she was still in love with Jason Mengal. Number three, that she said she had had sex with Alex Woodworth and never said that it was forced or that the consent or the sex was in any way non-consensual. And that she told Detective Prock that at the time of the incident at Hanson's, it was her, Mr. Hanson, and Mr. Hanson's roommate that were present. That's it. And I would expect that, again, there is many, many more things in that interview. I don't have a problem with anything relating to those, but anything else from that interview we would be objecting to.
Judge, as far as Friday, we have our expert Richard Tovar lined up to be here at 1 o'clock on Friday. We have, the intent is to play the recording of Wisconsin State Patrol Trooper Timothy Knutson, as well as the recording of Emmer Shields from Dunn County. It's my understanding that the state does not object on foundation or inability to cross-examine, so we would not need those witnesses to be here in person to enter those recordings in. I got the impression that they might object on other grounds, whether, not suggesting we take that up now, but I just want to make clear that if we are able to play those tapes, we can play them without, I have Trooper Knutson under subpoena. I mean, he can be here, but just professional courtesy, if he's not needed, I'll release him from his subpoena. And I believe they'd said that they could have Mr. Shields available as well, but we can either address the admissibility of those now, or at least just clear up the foundation.
We don't object, but
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So the state is not objecting.
we object to the playing of them, but we have no problems if the court ends up finding that they're admissible, we believe they're hearsay. But to the extent if the court finds that they are admissible and they come in under some exception to the hearsay rule, we don't care if Trooper Knutson or Deputy Shields are here to say, yes, that's my recording, and identify it.
And those recordings are not in evidence at this point, as I understand it.
Yes,
That's correct. That's
All
correct.
right. And so is the state anticipating resting before Friday at 1 p.m.?
It's hard to say if it's going to be, it depends on if we get Detective Prock finished tomorrow. If we do, yes. I expect Detective Prock's testimony, considering the fact that we've got 2 hours of recordings, is going to take about a half a day between his actual testimony and playing the recordings. So just depends on if we get through the other witnesses in the morning, which is not impossible, then I think we will be done tomorrow. Otherwise, it will be early on Friday morning.
All right, and so if you're not done, have the parties agreed that Dr. Tovar could be taken out of order before the state rests in order to accommodate the schedule?
We'll be done before 1 o'clock on Friday. I don't think there's any doubt about that, Your Honor.
Okay, very well. So we don't have that issue then?
it'd be great, because his only other availability would be late next week, and so, again, if we have Dr. Tovar, and we have the playing of those tapes, that would take up a defense half day. I just want to give everybody, obviously there's constitutional rights involved, there's lots of other issues involved, but the plan would be if Ms. McCandless chooses to testify, that would take place on Monday. We have Dr. Stephen Benson lined up to testify on Tuesday, and he's unfortunately the only witness that's available for us on Tuesday. And then Dr. Hopper is available all day Wednesday, as well as Dr. Lindsay Thomas on Wednesday. And so,
she's only available in the morning on
and she's
Wednesday.
only available in the morning on Wednesday. So, but we can get those two experts in, and then that's what we intend to introduce and to play. But that would leave us depending upon how long direct or cross of Ms. McCandless, if she chooses to testify, takes. There might be some gap time on Tuesday, which might be just a good time to start discussing instructions and whatever other matters are. But that's kind of, as the defense sees it, the plan for the future.
Marty?
Judge, I also have a request up for Friday. Unfortunately, I have to move out of my hotel because they don't have a room for me, and I have like a month's worth of stuff with me because that's how long I'm gone. And I would really like to start later Friday because I have to get everything.
This week?
Yeah, this Friday. I mean, I really think that with our schedule, we'll have a little extra time, but I definitely would prefer to start in the 9 to 9:30 time on Friday, so don't have to get up extraordinarily early to pack and check out of the hotel.
Well, I think, again, it's a little early, but I think it sounds like we can probably accommodate that.
Yeah. I appreciate that.
All right, anything further today?
Judge, I do intend to offer the exhibit of what was located in the car, so we'll have to take that up at some point before Ms. Van de Zan testifies. So that's it.
All right, and again, I'd also ask the defense counsel to give the court a heads up in terms of, what your position is with respect to those recordings. If, again, the state, it sounds like they would be objecting on hearsay. So just give that some thought. We don't need to go into it right now. In fact, I have to go to a wedding. I was going to do it at 4:30, so.
Judge, there were a couple sidebars, I believe. I don't know if they've all been put on the.
I don't think that we have taken care of all of that, but
And if you need to leave, I'm
why don't
certainly
we
fine
do
doing that
that?
tomorrow.
Well, I don't have to leave the building, but I don't want to have you all come back here, in 15 minutes. So what we can do is just take care of that first thing in the morning, and just ask counsel to be here again 8:15 tomorrow, and we'll take care of the sidebars as well as any other issues that we can do before we have the jury come in, okay?
Thank you.